Shalom, and welcome to the Remnant Radio Show, where we're living and learning a restoration lifestyle. Today, I would like to give you an update here at Remnant Remedy. We'll talk a little bit about essential oils and what is going on. It is July the 1st, 2020, and we have come through the first phases of the pandemic of the so-called virus. I haven't shared exactly what it is that I think is going on. I will share very briefly what I believe and see and have discerned and learned from my different studies and research and different doctors and spiritual things that I've come to the conclusion of so far. Number one, at first, I do know that there is a terrible virus, as we call it, out there. Strains that are out there. And the reason I know that is because in 2017, I believe it was, I did a radio show about the solar eclipse, which there's another one coming. And really a part of that was about how they could enhance chemtrails and bacteria, toxins, etc., that could release through the atmosphere during that time. And that was I think July, August, September of that year. And I talked a little bit about the Gospel of Stars in that series that I did on Remnant Radio. And one of the things I had noticed in the years prior when I was a survival real estate agent in Northwest Montana was every year things got worse. The crops weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. I learned a lot about frequencies and energy and how the chemtrails were damaging the ability of plants to germinate, the ability of plants to finish ripening off, etc. And I also, because, usually during November, December, January, February, you don't show too much property, especially for survival real estate customers, because there's snow up in the areas that are more considered to the liking of people who want to get away and homestead and not, just live in town. And so that meant that I didn't go out in stomping the grounds or stomping the mountains until usually March. And after 3 years in a row after several years of never, ever getting fever blisters, I noticed that 3 years in a row, when I went out to show property, I would look up into the sky and the chemtrails would begin. And within a couple of weeks of showing property, I would start breaking out with fever blisters. And then within 2 weeks of that fever blister, I would get super sick and come down with something. And it finally dawned on me after 3 years that I really believed it was something that was being dumped on us. And so the following years, I would beef up my immune system with echinacea, golden seal, what we were eating, ashwagandha, things like that, but mostly echinacea. I love Dr. Schultz's echinacea, or I would process my own and tincture it. But I began doing that, and then the following years, I didn't have this problem. I also beef it up, for the immune system for my children and my family, because I noticed a cycling every year that happened. There were times when I had one son who had a swollen lymph node that was almost the size of a golf ball. It came up on his neck. And I had another friend a couple hundred miles away who had a granddaughter in the Spokane, Washington area who had one behind her ear. And we knew of another family in Kalispell, an hour and a half away in the opposite direction, whose children were in and out of the hospital for these huge swollen lymph nodes. One of the things that we used was Helichrysum metallicum. And my friend in Spokane and I both used that on her grandchild and my son. And within 24 hours, it was really going down. And then I had a chiropractic doctor friend who reminded me about DMSO. And I used DMSO because it drives it in even more when you apply essential oil. But I only reserve that for when it's really something very, very painful or something we really want to drive in very quickly. And so I used it with the DMSO, and within 24, 48 hours, his lymph node was almost normal, or basically back to normal. But I also internally was giving him echinacea, golden seal, and mullein tea. And I've talked a lot about this in my colds, respiratory, how to anoint a loved one video that I did, and how to combat the flu, etc. So these were the things that I did differently, because my background before that was studying to be a vitalist with herbology, and I used herbs a lot more before I came to essential oils, and then I kind of reversed it, but I still use the herbs, and I believe in attacking from the inside and the outside topically. And then, of course, I won't go into it because it's in my other videos, but I did anointing. And my son was well within 2 days. My friend's grandchild, the lymph node had gone down, but I don't think they did the other things internally. And I don't think they might have done a complete anointing. And her granddaughter ended up in the hospital having to get it drained because it got so big up behind the ear. She became listless. And that's a sign when someone's really sick, is when they become listless, especially in children. That's kind of a sign that we really need to be on top of it. And the people in Kalispell, they did not do any natural remedies, and their children were in and out of the hospital for over 2 weeks with this condition. So my point about all that is there's stuff in the air. So back to this pandemic. At the same time of the solar eclipse, there was a university or state college, I'm not sure, I can't remember, I think it was the University of Montana. They sent up bacteria into the air in a balloon to release it to do experimentations. Now, I did some research. I was going to do a show on it, but I just didn't have time, because the bacteria that was in there was types that would kill bees. It would kill, it was outlawed in Europe. There were toxins in there that would kill birds and cause all kinds of respiratory, different kinds of things that would happen. And I wrote this all out because what happened was, that was like August, September, I think it was. Come December, January, my grandchildren in the Northwest Montana area just kept being sick. They couldn't get well, or they'd get well, and within a week or so later, they were sick again. So what happened was, I believe it was February, March, during spring break, I took a huge trunk of vitamins, herbs, teas, and of course, essential oils. And my goal when I went to spend time with my grandchildren was, I was going to make sure that we detoxed them and built up their immune system and finally got them over whatever this was. Well, when I got there, within about 24 to 48 hours, I also took one of my other sons with me. We came down sick, and we stayed in bed other than taking a hot bath. If we could drag ourselves to the bathtub, and it was a really great jacuzzi tub, because our bones were cold. And we were so sick for 14 days, we did not get up to do anything but go to the restroom. And it took those 14 days to be able to be well enough to get in a car to drive back home to Oregon. And during that time, everything, and I had noticed this through the years, all the herbs and oils that we used to use, you have to change them up. You know, it's like there's just different strands and mutations of what's going on that they're releasing on us. And I noticed things weren't working. And one thing I had never really used before was coconut oil, but the coconut oil was going in the tea because we couldn't eat. It was going in the tea, the mullein tea, the peppermint tea. I wish I'd had chaparral with me, but most people are scared of that, but I would have taken it with me if I'd known how bad that was going to be. And my son ended up sick too. Now, he recovered a little faster, well, lots faster in the end, but he got profuse bleeding of the nose. And so because my grandson was there helping us, we went through rolls and rolls. We didn't have tissue, you know, we had toilet paper, and we went through rolls and rolls of toilet paper and just soaking up the blood. And I was so sick, I couldn't talk. I could hardly breathe. And that was one of the reasons, even if I could talk, I didn't want to talk because I would not be able to breathe. Our eyes were swollen. We could hear squigglies going up and down inside our heads. I mean, it was awful. And I knew that if I called the ambulance, number one, I couldn't speak. I couldn't do anything. I was so weak and I couldn't do anything to admit my son. And I knew that they really couldn't do anything for us because if it's a viral reaction, you can't treat it. I mean, basically, unless it's bacterial. Historically, they know this, and this is why they don't give antibiotics for viruses or viral infections, because they know that, because a virus isn't a living, it's basically not a living thing. And I encourage you to do some research if you can. But this sickness was horrible. And let me explain to you, I have had viral meningitis. So when I tell you this was worse than that, it was worse than that. Anyway, it took me 8 more weeks after I got home to be able to get my voice back, to be able to talk, and to, you know, basically be well. So all that being said, my point here is that I know that there's a virus out there, or our body is and our exoskeleton is reacting to toxins that they're giving us. So I took coronavirus extremely serious. And of course, because of scripture, I believe, you know, there'll be plagues, etc. So I wanted to beef up, and of course, I did a lot of videos and on articles and newsletters so that you could be prepared to beef up your medicine cabinet and be prepared. And then, the more research I did, the more I learned, and of course, the more censorship that occurred. Here's some things. Number one, there really is something out there. But do I think that most people in the world have it? No. We've also learned that the effects of 5G can emulate and look just like this supposed COVID-19 strain that they had. And it's the 19th strain, so thus it's called COVID-19. And so there were people dying, and the first tests were done in Wuhan, where they turned up the 5G. These people were dying. There's some doctors and medical reports out there that show how the respiratory reactions, etc., look just like the COVID-19, but there's some differences. And then after they experimented on the Chinese people with the 5G, then they, I think, released an actual toxin that ended up with the horrible outbreak and things that they did to the people there. And so I do believe also that they released some things in other places all around the world, and they have been. And I think that's something we need to consider. Also, I have people in the medical field who are reporting that in the areas in the US where there was 5G turned on to varying degrees, that is where the virus seemed to take off more, so-called virus, okay? So, you know, just like New York, we don't know if they were really under the influence of 5G or they were under the influence of this virus. And we also know that EMF pollution can exacerbate parasites, heavy metals that they're raining down on us in our bodies. And so I don't think it's just one thing, it's a conglomeration of things. And then, of course, we have the testing, and, you know, some doctors and reports are saying that the testing is actually, the virus is actually put into you at the time of testing, or we all do have a certain thing in our bodies because of our immunity and or what we have been exposed to. So, you know, most of us could probably test positive, but that doesn't mean, you know, we're sick. And so we have there's real strains of something out there. We have the effects of 5G. We have a cover-up. We have a history of 6,000 years where people that are sick are put into isolation when they're sick. We don't put well people into isolation. And this has all been used, if you have eyes to see and ears to hear, to create a one world order. a new world order. And on one hand, that's extremely daunting. On the other hand, we've been talking about this for 30 years or more, some of us. Some of us have been preparing and waiting for more than that long. Some of us only 10, 20, 15 years. And so, you know, we thought it would come and it didn't come. And we thought it would come and it didn't come. And now it's here. It's here. And we have these state governors. We have, you know, we have to wear these masks. To me, you just as soon put on a yellow star. And, you know, someone said to me, well, it's just a freaking mask. And I'm like, well, it was just a freaking star in the ghettos in Germany, pre-ghetto and ghetto. And it's just, it is a sign. They used masks on the slaves. It's a sign of you have no voice. We have such evil rampant in government throughout the world that they can just basically make these laws. In our state, supposedly there's not going to be any due process. Anyone and everyone can be arrested. They're using their many tyrannical government plans, and they know that they are so blatant that they can just override us and do whatever they want. Of course, most of us don't. We don't want to protest. We don't want to bear arms. But the other side that's also being brought in to bring chaos, they are. And people are sooner or later going to have to take a stand, just like during the Civil War and other wars. People who are praying, people who are trying to intercede, one day it's going to face you and you're going to have to make some decisions. So if you haven't spent all these prior years getting close to the Lord, knowing his voice and being trained in the spirit more so than in the physical, then you need to get to quick boot camp right now, because we are in a time that you're going to need this. You need the Holy Spirit more now than ever. And so I just want to say that that's my view. I don't want to wear a mask. I try to avoid wearing a mask. I don't know how soon or how long it'll be before I'm confronted. I try to go out and not wear one. But with the new rules, it's not even, I'm not even so worried about being arrested. The problem is half of the people or more out there are brainwashed, and they will shun us or attack us. The store owners are, some of them in some states are being charged $1,000 if one person walks in per person who doesn't have a mask on. So even though if the businesses don't want to go along with it, it's something that, you know, especially the small businesses, they need to do to be able to have any kind of livelihood. So I think it's mostly 99% propaganda. I am not afraid of the virus. And if that's the way I'm going to go, I'm going to go. He knows the numbers of the hairs on my head, and he knows the days of my life, and he knows yours. So I encourage you to get close to Yeshua now. Now, that's just an overview on what I think. Give or take, you know, take it how you want. Blessings to you. If we disagree, we all are accountable to the Father. I just hope and pray that we are loving and respectful and kind to one another and not walk in fear, because most of what is going on is fear, and fear runs a lot of our lives in lots of areas of our lives. So let me go on to the update, because I'm going to do another separate show that is going to basically be called Repentance for a Hebrew Roots Messianic Believer. And that will be more of a preaching, teaching kind of thing. This is meant really just to be an update. There's just some things I wanted to bring to your attention that I don't have time to write. Things change so fast and come across my desk and or in a dream or a vision on a daily basis. And I don't have time to put it out. I've started so many newsletters and not getting them out. So I'm trying to do this, hoping that I won't get censored. You know, it's probable that it's happened. So anyway, so let me just share with you some things, just to share with you here about Remnant Remedy, and some ideas. And let me get a couple of notes here together. I'm trying to get them straightened out. So here's some things I'd like to address. Number one, for those of you who don't know, I do have a private Facebook group called Remnant Remedy Academy. And usually when I put a newsletter out, I invite you to subscribe to Remnant Remedy newsletter by going to remnantremedy.com. I understand that we have 3 separate stores. Each one ships differently with different flat shipping rates. But there's articles, there's videos, and there's the radio archives. And there's a subscription to the newsletter, and that is not the same as registering at any of the stores. One's an EMF store for EMF pollution, and one is for linen, and one is for essential oils and health supplements. So if you find me on Facebook, Nitsa Moshe, ask me or email me, contact me if you're on there, and ask to be invited to the private Remnant Remedy Academy group. And eventually we're going to have a membership and courses for artisan biblical-based aromatherapy. But I also want to teach other things like the 12 tribes and their constellations and how they camped out underneath a reflection of heaven on earth in the wilderness, the balm of Gilead. There's just so many, my teaching can vary from homeschooling. I want to do ancient pictograph Hebrew language because even for my aromatherapy class, I think that's something you have to get. You have to get the function, the movement, the design and purpose of letters and words so that when we get into aromatherapy, when we get into different kinds of modalities of natural healing, you understand that it's all based out of Genesis and the scriptures and how everything was created with Amar and Debar of vibrations, frequencies, and energy that was spoken or thought of from the mind of Yahweh. So I can cover all kinds of different categories of information. And so if we're going to, I sometimes put things in the Facebook group that never makes it to the newsletter. And sometimes it makes it to the newsletter and it never makes it to Facebook group. It's just until I can get some help, I'm just, all over the place, trying to stay focused. But, I have to stop all throughout the day to do consults, whether it's spiritual, physical, medicinal, or I'm mixing and custom blending, or I'm filling regular orders. Please know and understand that your orders to Remnant Remedy is what supports this ministry and our family. And I have gotten to the point in my life where I have to make a living, or at least have some kind of income, and instead of, just pouring out my heart, which is what I did for years and years. And so I have to take care of the business side first. And then, of course, I have a few wonderful people who send donations in to help support our ministry, because I have probably 5 to 10 books I want to get out. And I just keep praying for help, and that Father will send me the right people and the means to do all that I believe He's called me to. And on one hand, I feel like on a daily basis, I just need to give up because the world's going crazy. On the other hand, it just keeps coming up that what He's shown me over the years, I need to get out. I need to get it done. I just got to find enough hours in a day to do it. So anyway, if you want to be in the group, please ask to be there. One of the examples of why I started it really originally was because I have files and files and files of letters and emails and things where I have done individual counseling and written or spoken to someone about what I would do in my experience in traditional healing with different things. And the one I did last week was, what would I do if I had cervical cancer? And so I shared that. And then the week before, I did a newsletter on a lymphatic flush for your body and different ways that you can use that. So those are the kind of things that I work on. And so I share and just dump them there, which means I don't have to spend all this time editing everything, but I'm at least getting the information out and sharing it with somebody else after I've spent hours doing something for just one single person. I want to be able to get it out there. I posted in the group, there were one of them was, what were the 3 things that are enemies to your essential oils? And I want to go over this because I take for granted that people know these things, but then I realize there's so many people that do not. So, and they are heat, air oxygen, and light. So it is really extremely important that when you get a bottle of essential oil, that number 1, you keep the lid tight. If you have citrus oils or oils that contain a constituent like limonene, which is found in frankincense, you really need to keep those extra tight, and you need to keep them refrigerated to help them last longer, because they will oxidize more. If you kind of think about it, things that we think about sunshine, like the citrus, they really reflect the energy of the sun and their color and their vibrancy. And frankincense, they oxidize the fastest, and which means that you can actually have a physical reaction when you apply it topically. So the best temperature is 40 to 50 degrees for those. So that's why we say refrigeration. But most oils can be kept at 60 to 75 degrees and last many years. The date on an oil can usually go far past that if they're properly taken care of. So, and here's another thing. Okay, so let's say you got a 15 ml bottle or a 1 ounce bottle of frankincense or a citrus oil, and you start to get, a quarter, halfway down. Well, you really want to get extra bottles and label them and pour your bottles down so that there's very little head space or air space, because that is what makes the oil oxidize. And of course, keeping it cool, keeping it out of direct sunlight. That's why we use, a lot of companies use brown bottles. We use blue bottles. We believe there's extra benefits of the frequencies and energy of the cobalt blue. So you want to keep them out of the heat, keep them out of the direct sun, and keep the lids on tight. There was another question that I had in there, and I won't go into this because there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts. There's a lot of professionals and those who are affiliates with MLM companies. There are professional clinical aromatherapists, and of course they all have their let's just say, however you're trained is what you think is the right and best way. And I've been on both ends of the stick there. And so, like I really, in the professional aromatherapy world, you do not ever take an essential oil internally. But there are professionals who know that is possible at certain places and certain times in a certain way to be safe. And they are usually shunned by the majority of professional aromatherapists. Then there is the MLMs, which I came from 20-something years ago. And, they just promote lots and lots of oil use, and internally. And I've seen people have to have surgery, have damaged intestinal tract. I've seen people have all kinds of skin reactions because of the misuse and misunderstanding. So, I came from, oh yeah, sure, you can have an essential oil, and just put it in your drink, to professional training of going, oh, this is not safe, and now I know why. And so when I do my courses, I will actually go into that. But this question that I asked, that I wanted to bring up just for an overview, and of course you can find other ones out there that talk about these, but then they have a slant towards, you don't buy oils from a company unless they have the lab reports, basically. And I can tell you how many places I have tried to source from distillers and wholesalers of essential oils where the lab reports were adulterated, didn't exist, had a wrong, a number on it from when it was done. I mean, it was really hard to track down what the truth is. And most people don't ever get to see, smell, or source essential oils, so they don't smell the differences. To me as an artisan, smell is number one. It's just the smell. Once you're like trained, or you have an aptitude for that, you know it. And then you question, like sometimes I'll get a oil from a certain distiller that sometimes in a foreign country they call it a little bit different by name, or they just simply made a mistake on a batch and mislabeled it, so I have to go back to them. But if you weren't trained, you really wouldn't know that. But they always make it right. So they're a company of integrity. I've worked with other companies that distillers or wholesalers that they're not really doing the right thing. And back to the citrus oils, a lot of times people don't realize how hard it is to source a really good high quality frankincense. Frankincense, because of the limonene, can sometimes be adulterated, and I don't mean in a bad sense, because there are some that have wrong bad things in them, but they can use lemon and tea tree to chemically get it correct, but it's a lot less expensive to produce that frankincense. And frankincense in and of itself is kind of a story about that, on how to find a good one of those. But here's my question. Here, if I was looking for an essential oil from an essential oil company, this for me, in my experience, is what I would be looking for, okay? Number one, I don't care about the lab reports. And I'll go into that in the course, why. Because really, it's all boils back down to integrity. But here's the things that I do look for that you can actually look for. When you pick up the bottle, and if it's not on the bottle, do the labeling, then look to see if it is at least on their description on the website. You want to look for the plant species. You want the botanical Latin name. And even then, there are some that are interchangeable and are called something different but are the same. Or if you get really into it, it all has to do with the chemical chemotype. And don't worry about that right now. But you really want to know what the plant species is, because what some people call one particular oil, essential oil or plant, other people call something else. And camphor would be one of them, which is Ravensara, I-N-T, Sarah. And then there's variations of that. Even the word hoewood could be applied to it, but it could actually be the difference between whether it is camphor made from the bark or camphor made from the leaves. So you want to know the species. If I'm looking at a website or I'm looking at a bottle and it doesn't tell me the species, then I feel like the person who's bottling that doesn't has an opportunity not to be really open and honest, and or may not know what they're doing. I want to know the plant part. There's a big difference between a dill weed and a dill seed, or cinnamon leaf or cinnamon bark. And then I want to see the color of the bottle. It needs to at least be brown. If it's a clear bottle, then they really don't know what they're doing, and they're not helping you by selling you something that's not going to have a good long shelf life because of the exposure to direct light or indirect light through that. One time I was at the health food store, and they had these plastic tubes with like bath salts in it, and they had it all set up like the chakras, and the colors of the rainbow. And the thing was, they supposedly had essential oil in them. But the first thing I look at is, well, number one, it's in plastic. Now, I know that on certain types of plastic, you can get like 1 to 5% essential oil, but then it has to have something else, like a carrier or a carrier lipid oil. I'm not sure how they would measure it out on a bath salt, but the point is this: if it's on plastic, and a clear plastic at that, then I know it has very little, if any, essential oil. It might have a smell, flavoring, or some kind of scent to it, but it doesn't mean it's real and natural. So look at the color. If it's not at least brown, no way. I'm not going to consider it at all. The other thing is to look at the extraction method, because an essential oil, even I do the same thing. We'll say, oh, this is an essential oil. Well, maybe not really. Essential oil usually refers to the fact that it is distilled. However, the essential oils of a plant are the essential oils of a plant, the lipid, There are parts of the plant that's pressed that, and some plants don't have much. That's why we don't see essential oils of certain plants. But we want to look at the extraction method. Is it an absolute? Is it peeled? Is it distilled? You know, when you're dealing with, say, lemon or lime, if it's pressed, which is a pressed extraction, it's not truly an essential oil because it's not distilled unless it says distilled. The distilled citrus oil will last longer than the peel essential oil, but we usually consider the peel essential oil to have more stronger constituents, is how I would look at it. But I might want the pressed version, especially for long-term storage. So I want to look at the method, and there's all kinds of methods that you learn when you go into aromatherapy. So if it's an absolute, one of the major things you have to consider for some people, not a lot of people I would say, but some people, and depending on how you're going to use it, is an absolute is usually done with a solvent. And this is particularly when we're dealing with flowers. An absolute of a flower usually smells more like the original flower, but if you are allergic to the solvent that was used in the extraction to make it an absolute, then that could be a problem and you wouldn't want to use it topically. You might want to just use it in potpourri or in something, you know, to diffuse or something to smell it. Okay. And if you really want to get into it, which, you know, a lot of aromatherapists, especially small ones, don't, is I don't see a lot of times the country of origin. And on one hand, that may not matter to the average user. On the other hand, for me, I know particularly, like, if I want cinnamon bark, I want it from Madagascar. Spice oils that are from that area are so much stronger, in my opinion, and much more pleasant in their smell, without getting into all the chemistry. And and that's the same thing with other plants. If I see a sandalwood, for instance, which I think besides frankincense, it is the #1 hardest one to find a good high quality of, and most people don't ever get to smell that because of how hard it is, because in a lot of places it's illegal to get it and it's very expensive. But I found sandalwood because I have a Hadassah and a Cohen blend, and they depend on the aroma of a specific type of sandalwood from a certain area. If I can't get that, then I can't get the smell and the aroma that I need for my Cohen or my Hadassah. So I just can't make the blend, basically, is bottom line. And I don't have a chemist on hand to chemically, you know, fix it for me. So, and one of the things that we'll discuss in the courses is there's a huge difference between an MLM company, a professional clinical aromatherapist company, which could be a decent size, to very small and very hands-on, to an artisan. And an artisan is usually very small, family oriented, family business or ministry. And then, of course, there's only a handful of biblical aromatherapists out there. So those are just things, you know, all the answers aren't the same for each one of those. You are not going to get customized blending. You're not going to get custom counseling, spiritual or physical, in my opinion, unless I'm wrong. If you're not dealing with an artisan and or a trained professional aromatherapist, if you're dealing with an MLM, you're going to get whatever their books, their marketing team, whatever they put out, okay? Because it's more about signing you up to get you going. And just realize if you're dealing with MLMs, what they call their wholesale price is really basically the average retail price. Maybe a little higher, actually. The last one I checked was $28 higher than regular retail. So, and that was on a bottle of frankincense. So I just, those were a couple of things. So you want to look at the plant species, the plant part, and the color of the bottle, and the extraction method, and the country of origin. And that was something I discussed in that private group. Let's see. Okay, so I remember I told you to pour down your oils into smaller containers so there's not that much headspace. And I just wanted to give you a little update and brief. So one of the things that happened during March, April is, there was a big run on the antibiotic, antiviral essential oils, and it was hard. I mean, I looked local. I was even breaking down to the local health food store, to national wholesalers, to international distillers. And one oil that was really hard to get, if you could get it, because then the shipping would delay it, right? I had to wait over a month to 6 weeks for some, which was not good. Praise Yah, I had planned ahead because I saw this coming back in January, February, and was preparing. But I got to a place in March where I was on my last drops of cinnamon bark. And that's because cinnamon bark just has so many versatile uses, especially when it comes to antiviral, antibacterial. And, scripturally, cinnamon bark basically represents holiness, kadosh, being set apart. But there's different things that have happened during this on the supply of essential oils. One is that, and I got this information from Robert Tisserand, who is an educator on essential oils, and things that are antimicrobial oils like tea tree, eucalyptus, they're the elemi, they're the least, the lesser expensive oils, but they were in high demand. Whereas our specialty oils, like rose, sandalwood, those that are really for emotional, spiritual healing and or high dollar in skin oils, which a lot of times is your flowers, they weren't hardly bought at all. And that affects the growers. It affects the distillers. It's, it goes back. And then, of course, we have the shipping issues with the shutdowns. And so, that was like, for instance, during the hurricane in 2016, there was Haiti. And they're one of the main producers of vetiver. And that affected the crop there. And then we have the locusts that have been going through Africa and India. And, a lot of good oils do come out of India. And that affected the essential oils that came out of those countries. And of course, in 2019, we saw the fires run through Australia. And so that would take out tea tree plantations, although I understand that the majority of those are fine. In Australia is one of the only places I know of. I'm sure there's probably more since then, but Australia is the one place that actually cultivates sandalwood. And if you watch my teaching on the aroma of worship, sandalwood, I go and talk a bit more on sandalwood and what's entailed in that. I think the tree needs to be at least 50 years old, and they have to cut the whole thing down, and it has to grow amongst other companion plants. I think it's acacia. And so, there's a whole environmental terrain, ecological terrain that has to be kept into account. The other things that he mentioned was, of course, frankincense, jasmine, ylang-ylang, geranium are usually grown by small farmers or collectives, and they distill, and they may distill or they actually export them out to be distilled. Anyway, there's the pressure on the prices and the chain and the supply demand. And I understand one of the ones that's going to be a problem, or is in spruce and silver fir. So I think it's Abies. And I know I'm down to my last drops. I'm trying to source that again because the conifer logging got basically shut down in Norway due to this pandemic. And which, by the way, I learned today that I think it was February 28th was the day that Netanyahu and President Trump met. And the very next day is when WHO announced the pandemic. So anyway, so all that to say, you know, plants and essential oils are affected, growers, of course, and then there's a lot of you, I know that your businesses, your livelihood have been taken and or will, because, you know, as the supply chain slows down, we've already seen, you know, just coins. I noticed this, you know, 6 months ago, actually, that, well, actually longer than that, that coins aren't used much anymore. And already there's been signs posted around the country that there's not going to be, there's a shortage on, and that's because there's a shortage on coins because they've shut down a couple of mints. And even one of the first things that I had to deal with here is where the colleges and the coffee shops there, of course, they're well trained and brainwashed to, they could not touch any, we couldn't turn in our cards, you know, for how many, every so many cards you get, you know, clicked off or punched out to get a free drink or whatever, because they were afraid to touch our money, our cash, and yeah, cards. So, and then other places I have been in the last month didn't take a credit card, they only take a debit card. And then if you know anything about debit cards, they're not as protected from fraud as a credit card. And so I've been some places that only take cash on top of that. So I think that's kind of a sign those people probably aren't falling for the propaganda and the pandemic. But if, you know, the goal here is a one world order and a cashless society, which they can control you. So even if you stand up and you have a patriotic, you know, constitutional right that you think you have, it's the business who's going to be fined or shut down. So, you know, this is a hard time for us all to pray and consider what position are we to take here. Thank you for spending this time with me. May your garments always be white and let your head lack no shimmer. Shalom.